"Don't be sad, mister. You can borrow my mom," said the little girl to the Vampire King, sitting alone in the park beneath a crescent moon. The snow fell that evening in silence, each flake descending through the winter dark like ash from some distant forgotten fire. 2 weeks before the solstice, and the city hummed with life, strings of lights draped over storefronts, laughter spilling from taverns, the scent of roasted chestnuts drifting through cobblestone streets. But here, in the old park where iron gates had rusted and pathways cracked beneath centuries of footsteps, everything was still. The bench sat beneath a skeletal oak, its branches black against the grey-violet sky. Lampposts flickered weakly in the distance, their glow swallowed by the encroaching night. This place had once been grand, before wars tore through the land, before kingdoms rose and fell like tides. Now it was a relic, much like the figure seated motionless upon the weathered wood. Draven Miller sat alone. His coat was black as midnight, embroidered with silver thread that caught no light. The collar rose high against his pale throat, and his hands, gloved in soft leather the color of dried blood, rested motionless on his knees. Snow gathered on his shoulders, melting against the fabric, yet he did not move. Beside him on the bench, a single white rose lay untouched, its petals already browning at the edges. It had been a gift once, from someone who no longer drew breath. His eyes, red as fresh spilled wine, stared at the ground. Not in the snow, not at the rose, at nothing. People who passed, few as they were in this forgotten corner, felt the weight of his presence and crossed to the other side of the path without knowing why. Instinct, perhaps, or memory carried in blood, passed down through generations that had learned to fear the dark. He had not cried in 500 years, not since the night his sister died in his arms, her throat torn open by the very creatures he would later rule, not since he swore vengeance and became the monster he once hunted, not since betrayal carved out everything soft inside him and left only the throne, only the crown, only the cold. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. He had built an empire from ash and blood, commanded legions, crushed rebellions. His name was whispered in terror across 3 continents, a legend etched in shadow and suffering. And yet here he sat alone on a bench, holding a dying flower, because power, he had learned, was the heaviest kind of loneliness. The laughter came first, distant, bright, impossible to ignore. Draven Miller's gaze lifted. 2 figures moved slowly along the snowy path. A woman in a long grey cloak, her golden hair pulled back in a simple braid, and beside her, a small child bundled in a red coat with white for trim, mittens too large for her hands, a bow pinned crookedly in her dark hair. The girl clutched a paper bag against her chest, its edges crinkled and stained with grease. They stopped near a man huddled beneath a thin blanket on a nearby bench. Marielle knelt, pulling wrapped pastries from the bag and placing them gently in his trembling hands. She spoke softly, words Draven Miller could not hear, but recognized in the tilt of her head, the warmth in her smile, acts of kindness. He had not seen such things in decades, had not thought to look. Ivy tugged at her mother's cloak, whispering something, and Marielle nodded. They moved on, footsteps crunching softly in the snow. Draven Miller looked down at the rose again, at the petals curling inward, dying. "Mom!" He looked sad. The voice was small, clear, cutting through the winter silence like a bell. Draven Miller's head turned. Ivy stood a few paces away, her wide hazel eyes fixed on him with curiosity rather than fear. Her mother, Marielle, had stopped, one hand reaching gently for Ivy's shoulder, uncertainty flickering across her face. She whispered something, a warning perhaps, or an apology, but Ivy shook her head, and then she walked forward. Each step brought her closer, mittened hands swinging at her sides, the paper bag crinkling. She stopped directly in front of him, tilting her head as though trying to read something written in a language she didn't yet know. "Don't be sad, mister," she said, her voice steady with a kind of conviction only children possess. The words struck him like a blade between the ribs. Draven Miller froze. 5 centuries of control of iron forged in blood, and war shattered in the space of a breath. His lips parted, but no sound came. He stared at her, at this child who should have run, who should have felt the predator sitting before her, who instead offered him something he had not held in lifetimes: kindness, connection, home. "Ivy, sweetheart, I'm so sorry." Marielle hurried forward, cheeks flushed, her voice apologetic but not unkind. She placed a gentle hand on Ivy's shoulder, but she did not pull her away. Instead, she looked at Draven Miller, really looked, and something in her gaze softened. No pity, not fear, concern. She reached into the paper bag and pulled out a small pastry wrapped in brown parchment, holding it out with a tentative smile that reached her tired eyes. "Merry almost solstice," she said quietly. "It's probably sweeter than it should be, but Ivy insists they help." Draven Miller looked at the offering, at her hand, steady despite the cold, at the way snowflakes caught in her hair like stars. Slowly he reached out. His gloved fingers brushed hers as he took the pastry. Barely a touch, but it sent a shock of warmth through him he had not felt since he was human, since he was alive. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough, foreign to his own ears. Marielle nodded, already guiding Ivy back, but Ivy lingered, turning to wave with both mittened hands. "She makes really good cookies." "Mister?" Ivy added brightly, and then they were gone, disappearing into the snowy path, Ivy's voice trailing after them like a melody he couldn't quite place. Draven Miller sat motionless, the pastry in his hand. The pastry felt heavier than the rose, warmer than the night, more real than anything he had touched in centuries. Marielle was already several steps away when the voice behind her called out, soft, uncertain, almost fragile. "Is there a place nearby?" She stopped, turning. Draven Miller stood where they had left him, the pastry still in his hand, the white rose forgotten on the bench. His expression was difficult to read, tentative, cautious, as though he had not spoken to another soul in years. "Somewhere warm," he continued, his red eyes meeting hers, "where I might buy you both something hot to drink." Marielle hesitated. Every instinct told her to politely decline, to take Ivy home, to not invite a stranger, especially one who looked like him, into their evening. But there was something in his face, something hollow and aching that she recognized. Before she could answer, Ivy beamed. "There's a tea shop just past the square. They have cinnamon cider and little cakes." And that was that. The shop was tucked between a candlemaker's stall and an old bookbinder's workshop, its windows glowing with amber light, steam fogging the glass from the warmth within. A wreath of holly hung crooked above the door, and through the window shelves lined with jars of honey, dried herbs, and tin boxes of tea leaves filled the cozy space. They stepped inside, the scent of cloves, cinnamon, and wood smoke wrapped around them like a blanket. Ivy rushed to a corner table near the small hearth, where embers crackled softly, while Marielle and Draven Miller followed more slowly. They sat Draven Miller across from Marielle, Ivy beside her mother, and the fire flickered, casting warm shadows across their faces. Outside, snow continued to fall in hushed reverence. Ivy leaned forward, breathless. "We made cookies all afternoon. Mom, let me use the star-shaped cutter, and we gave them to 6 people tonight." "That sounds kind," Draven Miller said quietly, his voice unused to such words. Marielle smiled and reached into her satchel, pulling out a small thermos. "I always bring this for Ivy after we make our rounds." She poured steaming cider into 2 ceramic cups, one for Ivy, the other she offered to Draven Miller. He accepted it, fingers brushing hers once more. "It's been a long time," he murmured, "since anyone poured something warm for me." Marielle didn't ask why. She simply said, "Ivy has never been good at ignoring people who look lonely." Draven Miller gave the smallest nod and looked down at the cup. Steam rose like breath, like life. Across from him, Marielle tucked a stray lock of golden hair behind her ear, then turned her attention to Ivy, wiping a smudge of cinnamon from her daughter's chin with a napkin. She laughed at something Ivy whispered, leaning close to hear it better. Draven Miller found himself watching, not out of hunger, not the kind he had known for centuries, but out of something quieter, something closer to longing. There was no performance for her, no artifice, just steadiness, warmth, the way she gave what little she had and made it enough. The lamplight caught the edges of her hair, and for a moment she looked like something from a story he had forgotten how to read. Something sacred, something lost. "Do you have a tree?" Ivy asked suddenly, turning to him with wide, curious eyes. Draven Miller blinked. "A tree for the winter solstice," Ivy clarified. "Do you have one?" He hesitated. "No, I don't celebrate." Marielle's expression softened. "Every season counts," she said gently, "as long as someone notices it passing." Something in her voice, simple, unassuming, touched a part of him, he thought, long dead. And for the first time in 500 years, Draven Miller smiled. Not the cold, practiced expression he wore in court, not the predatory grin that froze men's blood, but a real smile. Small, fragile, true. Ivy gasped. "You look so much nicer when you smile." Draven Miller chuckled, an unfamiliar sound, rough and amused. "I'll try to remember that." They sat like that for a while, talking, sipping cider, watching the fire glow. Marielle didn't ask what he did. Ivy didn't ask why he looked sad. And Draven Miller didn't ask why two people with so little warmth to spare had chosen to share it with a monster. But something in him, something frozen for centuries, began to shift. He still didn't know their last name, but he already knew this night would haunt him forever. Not with fear, not with hunger, with hope. The small apartment was quiet when Marielle finally returned home. Ivy already asleep against her shoulder. She carried her daughter to bed, tucking the blankets around her small frame, brushing a kiss against her forehead. Outside the window, snow continued to fall. And in the park, beneath the skeletal oak, Draven Miller still sat on the bench. The pastry was gone. The rose remained, but something had changed. He whispered Ivy's words to himself, testing them like an incantation he didn't yet believe. "Don't be sad, mister. You can borrow my mom." For the first time in 5 centuries, Draven Miller wondered if redemption was something that could be borrowed, or if perhaps it could be earned. He had not always been a monster. The next evening, Draven Miller returned to the bench. He told himself it was a coincidence that he often walked these paths, that this park held no particular significance, that the skeletal oak and rusted iron simply marked another forgotten corner of a city he had haunted for decades. He did not admit, even to himself, that he was waiting. The snow had stopped, leaving the world crystalline and still. His breath did not fog the air, his heart did not beat, but he sat there nonetheless, hands folded, the white rose now gone, replaced by nothing but empty wood, and the ghost of warmth he had felt the night before. "You can borrow my mom." The words circled in his mind like a prayer he had forgotten how to speak. A memory surfaced unbidden, centuries old, sharp as broken glass. Smoke and screaming. The battlefield outside Gettysburg, 1863. His army tearing through human soldiers like wolves through sheep. Draven Miller had walked among the carnage, his crimson eyes cold, his hands stained to the wrists, and then a soldier wounded crawling toward a cluster of civilians huddled behind an overturned cart. Not fleeing, shielding them, his sword raised even as blood poured from his side. "Please," the man had gasped, "not for himself. They're just farmers. Just let them go." Something in Draven Miller had stilled. He could not remember why. Perhaps the man's courage, perhaps his own weariness of blood. He had raised one hand, and his soldiers had stopped, snarling but obedient. The civilians fled. The soldier collapsed. Draven Miller had carried him to the city gates himself, leaving him at the threshold where healers might find him. He never learned the man's name, never thought of him again until now. "Mr." The voice shattered the memory like glass. Draven Miller's head snapped up. Ivy sprinted down the snowy path, her red coat flying behind her like a banner, mittens waving wildly. Behind her, Marielle walked more slowly, a woven basket over one arm, her expression caught between fondness and exasperation. "I knew you'd be here," Ivy announced breathlessly, skidding to a stop in front of him. Draven Miller stared, caught off guard by the ferocity of his own relief. "I come here sometimes," he managed. "That's good," Ivy said matter-of-factly. Marielle reached them slightly breathless, snowflakes caught in her golden hair. "Ivy, you can't just run off." She paused, meeting Draven Miller's gaze. Something softened in her expression. "Hello," Draven Miller said quietly. An awkward silence stretched. Marielle shifted the basket, and Ivy filled the space with the ease of a child who had never learned to fear silence. "What's your name?" Ivy asked, tilting her head. "Mum says we shouldn't call you Mister if we're going to be friends." "Draven," he answered before he could think better of it. A name he had not spoken to a human in decades. "Draven," Ivy repeated, testing it. "That's a scary name, like a dragon. Ivy." "But you don't look scary when you smile." Ivy continued undeterred. "So maybe you're a nice dragon." Despite himself, Draven Miller's lips twitched. "I suppose that depends on who you ask." Marielle watched him carefully, then made a decision. She set the basket down and pulled out a thermos and 3 small cups. "We're about to make our evening rounds. Would you like to walk with us?" Draven Miller hesitated. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to retreat to shadow, to remember what he was. "Yes," he heard himself say. They walked together through the park, stopping at corners where the forgotten gathered. Each time Marielle offered food with quiet dignity, and Ivy chattered brightly, asking impossible questions. "Are you cold?" Ivy asked Draven Miller as they moved between stops. "I don't feel cold," he admitted. "That's sad. Snow is the best when you can feel it." "Do you live nearby?" Marielle asked more carefully. "Not nearby. I keep rooms in the old quarter." A half-truth. His estate sprawled beyond the city walls, cold and vast as a mausoleum. "Do you have a family?" Ivy pressed. Draven Miller's throat tightened. "No, not anymore." Ivy considered this seriously, then she reached up and took his hand, mittened, warm, impossibly small. "That's okay," she said simply. "Now you have us." Draven Miller stood frozen, staring down at Ivy's hand in his. He could crush her without thinking, could end both their lives before they drew another breath. Instead, he held very, very still. Marielle said nothing, but her eyes glistened in the lamplight. At the final stop, Ivy insisted Draven Miller drink the cider properly. "You have to hold it with both hands so it warms you up, and eat a honey cake without hesitation." He obeyed, feeling absurd and strangely seen in a way that had nothing to do with sight. Mortals looked through him. Cameras caught nothing. Even mirrors had long since forgotten his face. But this child, this woman, they saw him. When the basket was empty and the moon had risen higher, Marielle gathered Ivy close. "We should get home. School tomorrow." "Will you be here again?" Ivy asked Draven Miller. He should have said no, should have disappeared into the night and never returned. "Perhaps," he whispered. Ivy beamed. "Good. Don't be lonely, okay." They left, Ivy waving until they vanished beyond the park gates. Draven Miller remained on the bench for exactly 30 seconds. Then, silent as shadow, he followed. He kept to darkness, to rooftops and alleyways, tracking their scent and the bright beacon of Ivy's laughter. Twice he diverted threats. A pair of pickpockets in a narrow street, a feral vampire lurking near their route. Neither saw him coming, neither would threaten anyone again. The Smiths never knew. They walked safely through the night, Ivy skipping, Marielle's hand gentle on her daughter's shoulder. Their home was small, a second-floor apartment above a bakery. Warm light spilled from the windows. Marielle ushered Ivy inside, and Draven Miller watched from across the street, hidden in shadow. Minutes later, a nightlight flickered on in the smaller window, a crescent moon glowing softly. Draven Miller's breath caught. He stood there as the lights dimmed, as the city quieted, as snow began to fall again in whispers. His hand drifted to his chest, where no heartbeat, where no warmth lived, and yet something stirred there, something painful and terrifying and impossibly fragile. "I will keep you safe," he murmured to the window, to the sleeping child beyond, to the mother who had offered kindness to a monster. Whatever comes, whatever the cost, a vow he did not understand, a promise he would die to keep. He remained until dawn threatened the horizon, then vanished into darkness, carrying the warmth of their presence like stolen light. For the first time in 500 years, Draven Miller had something to protect, and for the first time in just as long, he was terrified of losing it. Draven Miller learned her full name by accident. 3 nights after their first meeting, he stood in the city archives, a place of dust and forgotten records where even the living dared not tread after dark. His fingers traced ledgers and tax documents with inhuman speed, searching for something he couldn't name. Marielle Smith, widow, seamstress, one daughter Ivy, age 6, husband Thomas Smith, soldier, died 1864 of consumption. The dates aligned, the occupation. But it was the commendation that made Draven Miller's hand still for extraordinary courage at the siege of Gettysburg, shielding civilians from enemy forces despite grievous injury. The archives blurred, memory crashed over him like a wave, rain mixing with blood. The soldier collapsed in his arms, heavier than any corpse, because he was still breathing, still fighting. "Tell Marielle I tried." The man had gasped, his eyes already glazing. "Tell her I'm sorry I won't come home." Draven Miller had said nothing. What words did a monster offer to the dying? He had carried the soldier to the city gates, leaving him for the healers, gone back to the war. Thomas Smith had survived. For a time, long enough to marry, to have a child, to leave behind the family he'd begged a vampire king to let him protect. Draven Miller stood motionless in the archives, the ledger trembling in his hands. He had not saved a stranger. He had saved her husband, Ivy's father. The debt he owed was written in blood and years, and a child's innocent smile. "You look different tonight," Marielle said softly. They sat on the bench beneath the oak, their bench now, though none of them had claimed it aloud. Ivy sprawled on the ground nearby, tongue between her teeth, drawing on a scrap of parchment with charcoal. Draven Miller glanced at Marielle. Different how? Troubled, she offered him a honey cake from her basket. More than usual. He took it, but then didn't eat. "I've been remembering things. Good things. Complicated things." Ivy looked up from her drawing. "Mom says remembering is how we keep people alive, even when they're gone." Marielle's expression softened with old grief. "My husband used to say something similar." Draven Miller's chest tightened. "Tell me about him." She hesitated, then spoke quietly. Thomas was a soldier, not because he wanted to fight, but because he believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. He survived a terrible battle. Someone saved his life, carried him to safety. He never knew who. Her voice wavered. He always said he owed that stranger everything, that he got to come home because of them. But not for long enough, Draven Miller thought, the weight of it crushing. He sounds honorable, he managed. He was. Marielle smiled sadly. Ivy has courage. His kindness and your warmth, Draven Miller added before he could stop himself. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of it. Done, Ivy announced, scrambling to her feet. She thrust the parchment at Draven Miller proudly. He took it carefully. The drawing was clumsy, childish. A tall figure in black sitting on a bench, face pale, eyes too large. But across the bottom, in Ivy's careful letters, "Sad Mr. Now Happy." "I made you smile," Ivy explained. "See, you're not sad anymore." Draven Miller stared at the drawing, something fracturing inside him. "Come to dinner," Marielle said suddenly. "Please. It's just stew. Nothing fancy." "But I would be honored," Draven Miller interrupted, his voice rough. Their apartment was small but warm, filled with the scent of herbs and bread. Ivy chatted endlessly, showing Draven Miller her collection of stones, her handmade dolls, her books. Marielle moved through the space with quiet efficiency, ladling stew, pouring cider, smiling at her daughter's enthusiasm. Draven Miller sat at their small table, feeling enormous and out of place, and desperately grateful. "You have to taste it properly," Ivy insisted, watching him like a hawk. "Close your eyes and feel the flavors." He obeyed. The stew was simple root vegetables, herbs, broth, but it tasted like home, like something he had not known in lifetimes. When he opened his eyes, both Smiths were watching him. "It's perfect," he whispered. Ivy clapped her hands, and he wore a real smile, unguarded, reaching his eyes. "See, Mom?" Ivy turned to her mother triumphantly. "He's not scary at all. He's nice." Marielle's expression was complex, tender, cautious, something else he couldn't name. "No," she agreed softly. "I don't think he's scary." For a moment, the small apartment held only warmth and the quiet clink of spoons against bowls. Draven Miller felt something he had not felt in centuries: belonging. Outside, in the alley below, a figure watched from the shadows. Pale fingers clenched, red eyes narrowed with contempt. Lucius, once Draven Miller's lieutenant, now his rival, observed the golden light spilling from the window. Watched the Vampire King laugh at a child's joke, saw him sitting at a human's table like a tame dog. "Pathetic," Lucius hissed. The king had grown soft, weak, distracted, and weakness in their world was an invitation to the knife. Lucius smiled, cold and sharp as winter. Perhaps it was time for a new king. All he needed was the right leverage. His gaze drifted to the window, where a small nightlight glowed, a crescent moon bright against the dark. "Perfect," he breathed. Then he vanished into the shadows, already planning. The park was bright with afternoon sun, a thing Draven Miller should not have been able to endure. But he had learned over centuries to walk in the dying light of winter when the sun was weak and his will was strong. Ivy ran ahead, chasing pigeons with the relentless energy of childhood, her red coat a splash of color against the white snow. Marielle walked beside Draven Miller, comfortable in their growing silence, her basket swinging gently. "She adores you," Marielle said softly. "I've never seen her talk to someone so quickly." "She's extraordinary," Draven Miller replied, watching Ivy spin in circles. Arms outstretched. Ivy's shriek cut through the air. She'd caught her boot on a tree root hidden beneath the snow, tumbling forward with a cry of surprise. Draven Miller moved before thought, inhuman speed blurring him forward, catching her before she hit the ground. "I've got you." he murmured. Ivy clutched his coat, breathless, then laughed. That was scary. Marielle rushed over, hands already checking her daughter. Draven Miller caught me like a superhero. But Draven Miller wasn't listening. His eyes had fixed on Ivy's chest where her coat had fallen open. Her dress shifted. There, above her heart, was a birthmark, crescent-shaped, silver pale against her skin, perfect as if carved by moonlight itself. The world stopped. When the crescent child walks beneath the dying moon, the broken king shall face his reckoning. She will restore what was lost or end what remains. The prophecy, spoken by seers 3 centuries ago, whispered in vampire courts. Feared, sought, forgotten by most, but not by him. Never by him, Draven Miller. Marielle's voice was distant, muffled. Draven Miller, what's wrong? He released Ivy as though she'd burned him, stumbling backward. His hands trembled, the first time they'd trembled in 500 years. His voice cracked. I should go. What? Why? Ivy's face crumpled with confusion. Did I do something wrong? The words shattered him. No, he choked out. Never. You're perfect. I can't. He fled, not walking, not retreating with dignity, fled like a coward, vanishing into shadow and speed, leaving Marielle calling after him and Ivy's small voice breaking on a sob. For 3 days, Draven Miller did not return. He locked himself in his estate, pacing the cold halls like a caged beast. The prophecy echoed in his mind, relentless, restore or destroy. He had thought himself beyond such fates, beyond hope or damnation. But the mark didn't lie. Ivy was the child, the crescent bearer, and he was the broken king, the monster who had lost his humanity so long ago. He'd forgotten what it felt like. What if his presence cursed her? What if simply caring triggered the prophecy's darker path? What if she died because he'd been selfish enough to crave warmth? She's safer without me, he whispered to the empty halls. But the words tasted like ash. On the 4th evening he heard it, a small voice outside his gates, calling through the iron bars. He froze, crept to the window. Ivy stood alone in the snow, her red coat bright against the darkness, mittened hands gripping the gate. Her breath fogged the air in small clouds. I'm sorry if I made you sad, she called. Mom said you might need space, but I wanted to tell you it's okay. You don't have to come back if you don't want to. Draven Miller's hands pressed against the glass. But I miss you. Ivy continued, softer now. And I drew another picture of us being friends. Friends. He was at the gate before he could stop himself. Pulling it open, Ivy looked up, her face lighting with joy. You are here! You shouldn't be out alone, Draven Miller said, his voice rough. It's not safe. I know, but Mom doesn't know I left. Ivy stepped closer, holding out a folded parchment. I wanted to give you this. He took it with shaking hands, unfolded it. 2 stick figures holding hands, one tall and dark, one small and bright. Above them, Ivy had written, Best Friends. Are you mad at me? Ivy asked quietly. Her eyes large and fearful. The word broke from him. God, no. You've done nothing wrong. You're... He knelt, meeting her eyes. Ivy flung her arms around his neck. Draven Miller held her carefully as though she were made of glass, of starlight, of every fragile thing he'd ever destroyed. I won't, he whispered into her hair. I promise, even if it doomed them both. High above, perched on the estate's outer wall, a figure watched. Lucius's spy smiled in the darkness. His pale fingers traced a rune in the air, sending a pulse of magic rippling through the night. A message to the coven. The prophecy child exists. The king protects her. The crescent mark has been confirmed, awaiting orders. In the grand hall of the vampire court, miles away, Lucius received the message and laughed, a sound like breaking bones. So, he murmured, the legend is true. He turned to his gathered followers, eyes gleaming with malice and ambition. Bring me the child. Let's see if our king bleeds when his new little heart is torn away. The hunt had begun. The vampire court convened in the Cathedral of Endless Night, a vast hall carved from black stone deep beneath the city, where no sunlight had touched in 1,000 years. Pillars rose like ribs of some long-dead beast, and the throne at its centre sat empty, waiting. Draven Miller stood before it, facing his coven. 50 vampires, each ancient and lethal, each bound to him by blood, oath, and fear. Their eyes glowed in the darkness, red, amber, violet, watching him with the predatory stillness of apex creatures. Lucius stepped forward, his voice smooth as poison silk. "My lord returns. We feared you'd forgotten us entirely." "I forget nothing, Lucius." Draven Miller's tone was ice. "Why have you called this assembly?" "Because your absence concerns us." An elder named Sarah spoke, her voice like wind through graveyards. "You've missed 3 blood tides, ignored 2 territorial disputes. The Western covens grow bold." "I will address them when—" Lucius pressed. "You spend your nights in the mortal quarters, my lord, sitting on park benches playing house with humans." Silence crashed through the hall. Draven Miller's eyes blazed crimson. "How I spend my time is not your concern. It is when your distraction weakens us." Lucius gestured to the gathered vampires. "They say the broken king has grown soft, that a woman and child have tamed the monster. Let them whisper." Draven Miller's voice dropped to a growl. "I am still your king." "Are you?" Lucius smiled coldly. "Or have you become something else, something lesser?" The air crackled with threat. Draven Miller could tear Lucius apart before he drew breath, could paint these walls with him, but violence would prove their point. So instead he spoke with the authority of 5 centuries. "This assembly is over. Challenge me if you dare, Lucius. Otherwise, bow." For a long moment, rebellion hung in the balance. Then Lucius knelt slowly, his smile never fading. The others followed. But as Draven Miller left the cathedral, he heard the whispers beginning, saw the glances exchanged. The kingdom was stirring, and he could feel the knife at his back, even if he couldn't yet see the hand holding it. Marielle sat alone on the bench beneath the oak, her basket empty beside her. The evening had turned cold, and she pulled her cloak tighter, watching snow begin to fall in the fading light. She'd come here every night since Draven Miller had fled, though she couldn't have explained why. Ivy asked about him constantly. Where did he go? Is he mad at us? Will he come back? Marielle had no answers. She told herself she was worried because Ivy cared for him, because the child had already lost one father and didn't deserve to lose another. The thought stopped her cold. Another? When had she started thinking of Draven Miller that way? This strange, pale man who appeared from nowhere, who looked at them like they were salvation, who smiled like he'd forgotten how. "You're here," she gasped, spinning. Draven Miller stood behind the bench, materializing from shadow like a ghost. His eyes were haunted, his expression raw. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said quietly. "You didn't." A lie. Her heart still raced. I've been coming here hoping. I'm sorry." He moved around the bench but didn't sit. "I shouldn't have left like that. Shouldn't have." His voice cracked. "Ivy deserved better." "She misses you." Marielle watched him carefully. "I miss you." The confession hung between them. Draven Miller closed his eyes. "You shouldn't." "Why not?" "Because He struggled for words. "I'm not what you think I am, Marielle. I'm not safe. Not good. I'm lonely," she interrupted softly. "That's what I saw that first night. Not dangerous, not a threat, just loneliness." He looked at her and something in him shattered. 500 years, he whispered. 500 years of nothing. And then a child offered me her mother, and His hands trembled. "I don't know how to be anything but a monster. But with you, with Ivy, I feel human." Marielle rose, moving closer. Do you feel human? I feel alive. The words broke from him, and it terrifies me. They stood inches apart, snow falling around them like a benediction. Whatever you are, Marielle said, her voice steady despite the fear flickering in her eyes. You've been nothing but kind to us, to Ivy. That matters more than anything else. You don't understand what I'm risking, what I'm bringing to your door. Then tell me. He almost did, almost confessed everything. The prophecy, the danger, the court that wanted to use Ivy to destroy him. But before he could speak, a church bell tolled in the distance. Marielle glanced toward the city. I should get home. Ivy will worry. Let me walk with you, Draven Miller said quietly. Please. She nodded. They walked in silence, but their hands brushed once, twice. The third time, Marielle's fingers caught his and held. Draven Miller stared at their joined hands like a miracle he didn't deserve. The apartment window glowed warm against the night. Draven Miller stood across the street, watching Marielle tuck Ivy into bed, seeing the child's nightlight, that damned crescent moon flicker to life. He should leave, should stay away, should protect them by disappearing. But he couldn't, not anymore. Inside the apartment, Ivy drifted to sleep, her drawing of best friends clutched in one small hand, and on the window ledge outside, a shadow moved. Caleb perched there, invisible to mortal eyes, watching the child sleep. His fingers traced the glass, silent as death. Behind him, two more vampires materialized from darkness. Lucius wants her alive, Caleb whispered. The king's little pet, our leverage. Caleb smiled. Very soon they vanished into the night, leaving only frost on the window where their hands had rested. Inside, Ivy slept on, dreaming of park benches and honey cakes, and the sad man who smiled when she held his hand, unaware that the monsters were coming, unaware that war had already begun. Marielle found the sigils by accident. She'd come to the park early before dawn, unable to sleep. Her mind kept circling back to Draven Miller, his confession of loneliness, the way his hand had trembled in hers, the fear in his eyes when he spoke of bringing danger to her door. The bench sat empty in the grey pre-dawn light. She approached it slowly, then knelt, searching for what? Some clue to the man who'd become so important to them. Her fingers brushed something carved into the underside of the wooden seat. Symbols, ancient and intricate, etched deep into the wood. They seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, like embers refusing to die. Marielle traced them, her breath catching. She'd seen marks like these before in Thomas's old books about the war, about the creatures that had nearly destroyed them all. Vampire royalty. Her hand jerked back as though burned. You shouldn't touch those. He spun. Draven Miller stood 10 paces away, his face ashen, his eyes filled with something that looked like grief. What are these? Her voice shook. Draven Miller, what? They're mourning marks. He moved closer slowly as though approaching a frightened animal. I carved them centuries ago, for my sister, for everyone I've lost. Marielle stood, backing away. You're one of them. You're a vampire. The word fell between them like a stone. Yes. The world tilted. Marielle's mind raced through every moment, his pale skin, his red eyes, the way he never ate. How he moved too quickly appeared from nowhere. The monster stories Thomas used to tell. Not just any vampire, Draven Miller continued, his voice hollow. I'm their king, the broken king. Draven Miller, the creature your husband fought against at Gettysburg. No, she shook her head. No, you saved Thomas. I saved him from my own army. Draven Miller's laugh was bitter. I spared one man in 500 years of slaughter. Marielle, one man. And you want to call me good? You've been kind to us. To Ivy? Because I'm selfish. His voice broke. Because you made me feel something other than empty. Because your daughter looked at a monster and saw someone worth saving. He took a shaking breath. But I'm still what I am, a killer, a king of corpses. And now I put you both in danger because my court knows. They know about the prophecy, about Ivy's mark, and they'll come for her to hurt me. Marielle pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming. The birthmark. That's why you ran. She's the Crescent Child. Ancient seers foretold she could restore my humanity or destroy me. He met her eyes. I should have stayed away. Should never have let myself. His voice cracked. I'm sorry for all of it. He turned to leave. Wait. He stopped, but didn't turn. Marielle's mind warred with itself. Terror, betrayal, the image of Thomas's stories of vampire atrocities. But beneath it all, another truth, the way Draven Miller held Ivy so carefully, the genuine smile he wore at their table, the loneliness in his eyes that mirrored her own. I don't know what to believe, she whispered. Believe I'm a monster. They both turned. Ivy stood at the park entrance, still in her nightgown beneath a hastily thrown-on coat. Her face crumpled with worry. Ivy, what are you? Marielle rushed forward, but Ivy ran past her, straight to Draven Miller. The Vampire King froze as small arms wrapped around his waist. Don't leave again, Ivy said, her voice muffled against his coat. Draven Miller's hands hovered, trembling. You don't understand. I'm not what you think. You're my friend. Ivy looked up, her eyes bright with tears. You listen when I talk. You smiled at my drawings. You're not bad, Draven Miller. You're just sad. And she's right. You know. Marielle's voice was quiet but steady. She moved closer, placing a hand on Ivy's shoulder, meeting Draven Miller's anguished gaze. I'm terrified, she admitted, of what you are, what you've done. But I'm also... She swallowed hard. I'm more afraid of what happens if you leave. If Ivy loses someone else she loves. You don't know what you're saying. I know you've had 500 years to hurt us and haven't. I know my daughter sees something in you worth protecting. Her voice wavered. I know I'm probably a fool, but I want to believe in who you've been with us. Not the legend, not the king, just you. Draven Miller sank to his knees, eye level with Ivy, his composure finally breaking. I could destroy everything you love, he whispered. Or you could protect it, Marielle countered. Help us understand, help us survive whatever's coming. Ivy's small hand found his cheek. We're still friends, right? Draven Miller closed his eyes, one red tear sliding down his pale face. Blood, not salt, but grief all the same. Yes, he breathed, always. Miles away in the cathedral of endless night, Lucius addressed his gathered rebels. Tomorrow night, he said, his smile sharp as broken glass. When the king is distracted playing house, we take the child. We end his weakness. Caleb stepped forward. And if he resists, then we kill them all. Lucius's eyes gleamed, and crown a new king from the ashes. The vampires bowed. The trap was set, and the smiths, huddled together beneath the oak tree, had no idea their last peaceful night was already ending. The scream tore through the winter evening like a blade. Draven Miller was 3 streets away when he heard it. Marielle's voice, raw with a terror so primal it bypassed thought, and struck directly at something buried deep in his dead chest. He moved, the world blurred, cobblestones cracked beneath his feet. Startled mortals stumbled back from the shadow that raced past them, too fast to be human, too desperate to care about secrecy. He found Jennifer collapsed in the snow outside the school, her hands clutching something small and red. Elizabeth's mittens, torn, blood-stained, discarded like trash. No. Jennifer's voice was barely human. No, no, no. Michael dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her shaking shoulders. Jennifer. She turned to him, and the devastation in her eyes nearly broke him. They took her. Her voice cracked into a sob. I was late, just 5 minutes late, and she's gone, Michael. Someone took my baby. He pulled her against his chest, feeling her shatter against him, her screams muffled in his coat. Around them, snow continued to fall, indifferent to the breaking of a mother's heart. "I smell them," Michael said, his voice dropping to something ancient and lethal. "Vampires, my own kind." Jennifer pulled back, gripping his coat with white-knuckled hands. "Bring her back." Tears streamed down her face. "Please, Michael, bring her back. I will." He cupped her face, his red eyes blazing with a fury that made the air crackle. "I swear it. Swear it properly." Her voice turned fierce despite her tears. "You're a king." Michael's hand moved to his chest. He spoke words in a language older than the city, older than human memory, and his palm burst with crimson light, blood, magic, binding, absolute by blood and bone, by crown and shadow. "I swear on my immortal soul I will bring Elizabeth Thompson home, or I will burn this world to find her." The oath seared into the air like a brand. Thunder rolled overhead despite the clear sky. Jennifer nodded, trembling. "Then go, go." He vanished. The city's underbelly had always been Michael's domain. The forgotten tunnels, the abandoned churches, the places where vampires gathered in secret. Tonight, it became a hunting ground. The first vampire he found was feeding in an alley. Michael grabbed him by the throat, slamming him against the wall with enough force to crack stone. "Where is Robert?" His voice was winter itself. "I don't." Michael's fingers tightened. "Where?" "The cathedral, the old cathedral beyond the western gate." The vampire choked, eyes wide with terror. "He's using it," for Michael snapped his neck before he finished speaking. He moved through the streets like vengeance given form. Vampires who sensed his approach fled. Those too slow to run met swift, brutal ends. The cobblestones trembled with each step. Lampposts flickered and died in his wake. Humans locked their doors without knowing why, sensing some apex predator stalking past their windows. In the vampire havens, words spread in panicked whispers. The broken king has awakened. The monster has remembered what he is. Michael tore through 3 safe houses, leaving carnage behind. At each, he asked the same question. At each, the answer pointed him forward. The forgotten cathedral where traitors gathered, where Robert waited, where Elizabeth was being held. By the time he reached the cathedral gates, blood stained his hands and coat. His eyes burned like coals. The rage that had sustained him through 5 centuries of war, the fury he'd buried beneath loneliness and grief, roared back to life. The iron gates exploded inward at his touch. Robert, his voice shook the ancient stones, sent bats shrieking from the rafters, made every vampire inside freeze in primal fear. The broken king had come, and he would show no mercy. In a locked chamber deep within the cathedral, Elizabeth sat on cold stone, her hands bound with silver chains that burned her wrists. She was crying, silent tears that dripped onto her torn dress, but she wasn't screaming. Mommy had taught her to be brave. And she knew something the vampires didn't. 3 guards stood by the door, their pale faces nervous. They'd heard the roar, felt the cathedral shake. "Should we?" One started. The door exploded inward. Michael stood in the doorway, his coat shredded, his face splattered with blood that wasn't his own. His eyes found Elizabeth, and for one moment his expression cracked. Relief, rage, love, all tangled together. "Elizabeth, I knew you'd come," she whispered, her voice steady despite her tears. The guards moved to stop him. They died before they took a step. Michael crossed the room in a blur, dropping to his knees before the child, his bloodied hands careful as he examined her chains. "Did they hurt you?" "A little, but I was brave." Elizabeth's lower lip trembled like Daddy would have been. "You're the bravest person I've ever known." His voice broke as he snapped the chains with his bare hands. "And I'm getting you out of here." He lifted her into his arms and she buried her face in his neck, finally letting herself cry. "Mommy, she's waiting, we're going home." But as he turned to leave, the shadows moved. Robert stepped into the doorway, flanked by 20 vampires, all armed already. "I'm afraid," Robert purred. Michael held Elizabeth tighter, positioning himself between her and every threat in the room. His eyes blazed crimson, and when he spoke, it was the voice of the monster king who had once drowned kingdoms in blood. "Then you'll die trying to stop me." The cathedral held its breath, and then the battle began. Michael moved first. He sat Elizabeth down behind a stone pillar, his hand gentle on her head. "Stay here. Don't watch." Then he died. The first 3 vampires died before they could draw breath. Michael tore through them like a storm through paper, his movements too fast to track, each strike precise and lethal. Blood sprayed across ancient stone, bodies crumpled. Robert snarled, signaling the others forward. The cathedral erupted into chaos. Vampires lunged from all sides, claws extended, fangs bared, eyes wild with hunger and fear. Michael met them with 5 centuries of honed violence. He caught one by the throat and threw him through a stained glass window, the colored shards exploding outward in a shower of crimson and gold. Another came at his back. He spun, driving his hand through her chest and ripping out what remained of her heart. Magic crackled through the air, dark spells flung by Robert's sorcerers. Michael deflected them with barriers of his own blood, the crimson shield shimmering like rubies before shattering under assault. A bolt of shadow struck his shoulder, burning through fabric and flesh. He barely flinched. "Is this all you have?" Michael's voice echoed through the cathedral, cold and terrible. "I've survived wars that would break you. I've outlasted empires. You think 20 fledglings frighten me?" He was magnificent and monstrous, coat billowing, eyes blazing, moving through combat like a dancer, through choreography written in violence. Every movement was economical, brutal, perfect, but there were too many. A blade caught his side, claws raked across his back. A spell hit him square in the chest, sending him crashing into a pew that splintered beneath his weight. Michael Elizabeth's scream cut through the chaos. He was up instantly, blood streaming from a dozen wounds, eyes finding her crouched behind the pillar, unharmed, terrified, but alive. That's all that matters. Robert descended from the upper gallery, his smile cold as winter. "You fight well for a lovesick fool, but you're bleeding, old friend. Even kings die when they forget what they are. I remember exactly what I am." Michael straightened, his wounds already beginning to close. "The question is, do you remember who taught you to fear?" He unleashed power he hadn't touched in centuries. The air itself screamed. Every vampire in the cathedral staggered as Michael's presence expanded, an aura of such ancient primal dominance that it bypassed reason and struck directly at survival instinct. Lesser vampires fell to their knees, unable to resist the weight of his true nature. This was the broken king, the monster who had conquered nations. Michael moved through them like judgment itself. Bodies fell, blood pooled, the cathedral's stones ran red. When only Robert remained standing, Michael closed the distance between them in a heartbeat, his hand wrapped around his former lieutenant's throat. "You touched what is mine," he said quietly. But Robert laughed. A wet, choking sound. "Look behind you." Michael's head snapped around. The pillar where he'd left Elizabeth now glowed with pale light. Symbols crawled across the stone, ancient runes activated by blood and violence. The prophecy seal. No. Silver chains erupted from the pillar, wrapping around Elizabeth's wrists, ankles, throat. She cried out as they tightened, burning her skin, binding her to the stone. The seal activates in the presence of the Crescent Child and the broken king's blood. Robert gasped. "Old magic unbreakable unless," he grinned through broken teeth. "Unless the king offers his immortality in exchange." Michael dropped him, racing to Elizabeth. He tried to break the chains. They reformed instantly. Tried to tear the runes from the stone. They burned his hands to the bone. Michael, Elizabeth's voice was small, scared. "I can't breathe." The chains were tightening, crushing. The prophecy's test made manifest. Restore the king or destroy what he loves. There has to be another way. Michael's hands were shaking, his mind racing through 500 years of accumulated knowledge, searching for anything, any loophole. There isn't. Robert's voice drifted from where he lay, bleeding. "Your power or her life, the seal demands balance." Michael looked at Elizabeth, at her tears, at the chains crushing the breath from her small body. Centuries of survival, of clawing his way through an immortal existence that meant nothing, of power that kept him breathing but not living, versus one child who had taught him what warmth felt like. "No choice at all. Michael, no," Elizabeth whispered, somehow knowing what he was about to do. "Shush." He pressed his forehead to hers, his hands gentle on her face. "You told me once that I didn't look sad anymore. You gave me that. But now, let me give you something back." He placed his palms on the seal, speaking words in the old tongue. His voice trembled but held steady, each syllable of payment. Each word carving away pieces of what he was. "I offer my eternity, my immortal blood, the crown of shadows and the throne of endless night. Take it all, just let her go." The seal blazed white-hot. Power roared out of Michael in a torrent. 500 years of stolen life, of dark magic, of accumulated immortality, all of it draining away like water through broken hands. His eyes burned from crimson to grey. His skin, already pale, became nearly translucent. Centuries of strength bled away. The chains around Elizabeth shattered. She fell forward, and Michael caught her. His movements now human slow, human weak. "I've got you," he gasped. Around them the cathedral groaned, the prophecy seal cracked, spreading fissures across stone and magic alike. Michael looked at Elizabeth, his grey eyes now capable of tears that weren't blood. "Run," he whispered. "Find your mother. Run." But Elizabeth clung to him, sobbing. "You're hurt. I'll be right behind you." A lie. He could barely stand. The wounds that had been closing now bled freely. His immortal strength was gone, replaced by fragile human mortality. He'd traded eternity for her life. And he'd do it again. Every time Michael didn't remember collapsing. One moment he was holding Elizabeth, telling her to run. The next darkness swallowed him. Not the familiar darkness of a mortal rest, but something deeper, more final. Is this dying? He thought distantly after 500 years. Is this how it ends? But then warmth, voices, the scent of herbs and clean linen. He opened his eyes to unfamiliar surroundings. A small room, sunlight streaming through lace curtains, his body wrapped in bandages that smelled of lavender and something medicinal. "You're awake." Jennifer sat beside the bed, exhaustion carved into her features, but her eyes bright with relief. She reached forward, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead with infinite gentleness. "How long?" His voice was rough, human, fragile. 3 days. She smoothed the cloth carefully. "You've been in and out, fevered. The wounds," her voice caught, "they don't heal like they used to, do they?" He looked down at his hands, pale, but not corpse-white, lined with scars that would remain, mortal hands. "No," he whispered, "they don't. Good." Jennifer's smile was small but fierce. "Now you can't do anything foolish without consequences." Despite everything, he laughed, a raw, painful sound. "I think I've already done the most foolish thing possible. Saving my daughter. Loving your family." The words hung between them, naked and true. Jennifer's hand found his, her fingers warm and solid. Then we're both fools. Over the following days, she tended to him with quiet devotion, changed his bandages, spooned broth between his lips when he was too weak to hold the bowl, sat beside him in comfortable silence when words weren't needed. Elizabeth visited constantly, crawling into the bed to tell him stories, to show him her drawings, to simply hold his hand and reassure herself he was real. "You look different," she said one morning. studying his face with a child's honest scrutiny. "Your eyes aren't scary red anymore. Do you like them better this way?" She considered it seriously. "I like them because they're yours. Red or grey or purple doesn't matter." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her hair, wondering how he'd ever believed himself incapable of love. 2 weeks later, Michael returned to the park. It was evening, the sky painted in shades of violet and gold, snow falling in gentle whispers. He walked slowly, his body still healing, still adjusting to mortality, and found himself drawn to the bench beneath the skeletal oak. Their bench, the place where everything had changed. He sat carefully, his grey eyes taking in the familiar scene, the rusted gates, the cracked pathways, the distant lights of the city. Once this place had been where he mourned, now it felt like coming home. Michael. He turned to see Elizabeth racing down the path, her red coat flying, mittens waving wildly. Behind her, Jennifer walked more slowly, a soft smile on her face. Elizabeth crashed into him with a force of absolute trust, and he caught her, mortal strength now, but enough, pulling her into his lap. "We knew you'd be here," Elizabeth announced proudly. "It is now," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. Jennifer reached them, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her eyes shining in the lamplight. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. For a long moment, they simply existed together, watching snowfall, listening to Elizabeth chatter about her day, feeling the comfortable weight of presence. Jennifer tensed lightly, and he turned to face her fully, his grey eyes no longer monstrous, just human and earnest and terrified, needing hers. "I don't want to borrow any more," he whispered. "I don't want to be a visitor in your life, Jennifer." His voice cracked. "I want a home," she finished softly. The word broke from him. A home, a family, this. "But I have nothing to offer except yourself." Jennifer's hand cupped his cheek, her touch gentle. "That's all we've ever wanted. Not the king, not the legend, just you. The man who sits on park benches looking sad. The one who smiles at drawings and eats stew like it's sacred. The one who gave up eternity for my daughter. Tears, real tears, salt instead of blood slid down Michael's face. "I hoped you'd say that," Jennifer continued, echoing her words from that first night, "because we want you too, not borrowed." Elizabeth squirmed in his lap, turning to face him with her characteristic intensity. Michael looked at this child who had changed everything, who had walked up to a monster and offered him belonging, who had taught him that warmth wasn't something to fear. "Forever and ever," he promised. "Good." Elizabeth took one of his hands and one of Jennifer's, holding them together. "Because you're family now, and families don't leave." Michael looked down at their joined hands, his scarred and mortal. Jennifer's work-worn and gentle, Elizabeth's small and trusting, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. Not power, not immortality. Peace. He smiled. Truly smiled, and Elizabeth gasped. "Look, Mommy, he doesn't look sad at all anymore." Jennifer's eyes glistened. "No, I don't think he does." Snow continued to fall around them, soft as benediction, covering the park in white. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. The city hummed with life, mortal, fragile, beautiful life. Michael Thompson, once the broken king, once the creature who believed himself beyond redemption, sat on a bench with a family that had saved him, not through power, not through fear or duty or magic, but through 7 simple words spoken by a child with mittens too big for her hands. "Don't be sad, mister. You can borrow my mom." He had borrowed warmth, and found he could keep it, not as king, not as a monster, but as something far more terrifying and precious. Human, home, loved. The end. A vampire king. A brave child, a mother with endless grace, a story not of borrowed warmth, but of found family, and the truth that even immortal hearts can heal.